What is probability? So last time we talked about two-way tables. This is a way to take a population and simplify it, so we don't have to write out the whole sample space. We can just simplify it with a few numbers and some totals. Notice your two totals, the total column and your total row, need to add up to the same thing. Seen a lot of that. This makes and a whole lot easier because we can just read it off the chart. However, it makes or a whole lot more difficult because you have to worry about double counting. If you double count the queen of diamonds, when you count the queen and the diamond, you then need to subtract one queen of diamonds because there's only one, not two in the deck. It does, however, make conditions a whole lot easier because we only have to look at one column or one row of our table. Then we talked about your grade, specifically quiz scores, and trying to take that population and boil it down to just a simple number. We take it, we reorganize all of the scores, that beautiful population, and we average them together. Add up all of the numbers and divide by the number of numbers. That's how we get the average. We also talked about the median, which is the middle number, the mode, which is the most common number, or numbers, and the range, how far the numbers are spread out. These are called parameters. Parameters are a way to take a population and boil it down to just a simple number or a simple set of numbers that give us information about the population as a whole. So we don't have just a mess of numbers in our population. What is probability? Episode 4. Weights, scales, and curves. Illustrated and narrated by Izzo. So we were talking about your grade and we were talking about quiz scores. However, in real life, you don't just have quiz scores. You also have test scores and homework scores. These are a lot of grades. Now, what do we do with these grades? A lot of people think that you just take all of the grades and you average them together, and that's how you get your average. That would be incorrect. You do not take the quiz scores, add them to the test scores, add them to the homework scores, and then divide by the number of numbers. That would be far too simple. That's not what happens. What we do is we start with taking the quiz scores and we average them out to one number. That's the 68.7% that we saw before. Then you take the test scores and you average them out to one number. And you take the homework scores and you average them out to one number. These numbers are then representative of their categories. A lot of people think once you take all of these scores, you average the three scores. So add them up and divide by the number of numbers, which is 3. Also incorrect. That is not how your average is calculated. What we do in schools is we do weighted averages. Quiz scores are weighted much bigger than homework scores, and test scores are even bigger than quiz scores. They have more weight. They're considered more important. Now, what weights are given to each category is decided by the teacher. Sometimes the teacher just makes up numbers. Sometimes these numbers are due to a core philosophy that a teacher holds. But regardless, it's based on what the teacher wants. Homework scores in this case are 10%. This teacher does not care about homework scores. Homework scores, not important at all, to have it only be 10. Which is good for this particular student who clearly has no idea what homework is. Test scores for this teacher is incredibly important. To count it as 50%, that's half of your grade is just based on your tests. Okay, so what we do is we take these weights and we take the averages from each of the categories, and that's how we figure out your total average. So we take the 40 for your quiz weight and we multiply it by your quiz average. We take your 50 for your test weighting and we multiply that by your average test score. And then we take the 10% weight and we multiply that by that 14.6 average homework score. And then we divide the whole thing by 100 because there are 100 weights. The 10 plus 40 plus 50 make 100 different weights. So 40 weights go for quiz scores, 50 weights go for test scores, and 10 weights go for homework scores. And you get a beautiful C. So even though your homework scores are a 14.6%, you still get about a C average. However, if you have the same grades in another class with a different teacher who weights things differently, your score could drastically change. For this, weighting the tests are still the highest, and the weights for homework still the lowest. However, they're closer together. Homework is now worth 25%, and tests are only worth 40%. So I take the 35 weights for quizzes, multiplied by the quizzes, the 40 weights for tests, multiplied by the tests, and the 25 weights for homework, multiplied by the homework, divide everything by 100, and now you've got a 64. You failed. This is because this teacher believes that homework is more important. So it's not necessarily what you do, but what your teacher believes is most important. For some of you, your test scores are not particularly good, but your homework scores make up for it. For others of you, your homework scores are not particularly good, but your test scores make up for it. However, you have to be very careful. That part in the syllabus at the very beginning where it tells you what the homework is weighted, what the quizzes are weighted, and what the tests are weighted, actually extremely important and could mean the difference between passing with a C and failing by a point. All right, now that we know how this final average gets put on your report card, how you get that 64.0 or that F, we can talk about a few more things. Because sometimes it doesn't stop with the 64. In high school, normally you get a 64 or an F on your report card and that's the end. However, in college, things get a little different. Sometimes there is a scale. Now, many of you may have noticed that if everyone does really poorly on a quiz, the teacher tends to bump everyone's grade up 20 points. That's called a scale. When everyone's grade goes up by a certain number of points, that is the scale. They are scaling everything up. So, in this case, your 64 plus 20, you now get a B. It's very rare that this happens for your total grade, like your grade on your report card, but sometimes it does happen for a short quiz or a test. Let's go back to that 64, that F. Now, in some cases, there's actually a conversion chart. This rarely happens in college, but it happens every time you take a test in New York State. New York State has random conversion charts. Where these conversion charts come from, who created these conversion charts, who knows? Who knows? These are very, very strange, very mysterious conversion charts. Some people have the legend that these conversion charts are written by people who study the questions and the past performances of students and the field tests of the specific questions put on the test. Other people think it's just complete magic. Anyway, these conversion charts then tell you if your raw score is a 64, you're really getting 83. So your F, actually a B. These conversion charts are very rare, and normally they only happen for state tests, for Regents exams in New York State's case. They are a very, very special form of grading. So let's go back to the F. So you're at the 64. What happens if there is a curve? You've probably often heard of teachers curving a test, or in the case of colleges, sometimes the entire class is curved. What this means is it does not matter how well you do, it matters how well other people do. So in this case, Alice actually knows what she's doing. She got a 90. No one else apparently has a clue what they are doing. You are at a 64, so you are 1 point above Bob. You're in that 60 range from you to about Ethan. Alice is the only one who knows what's happening. However, sometimes in college what will happen is teachers will say, I want 2 people to have A's, 3 people to have B's, 4 people to have C's, 3 people to have D's, and 2 people fail my class. I have decided this before I meet any of you, before any of you take your first test, before I see any of you. This is what my grading system is. So, it doesn't matter that you only know 64% of the material. You still get an A. This happens a lot in places like law schools or med schools because they don't care if you know the material. They care who is the best. They care who is the best doctor, not if that's a good doctor. I mean, clearly, you only know 64% of the material. Alice is actually a decent doctor. However, you're better than Bob. And you're a whole lot better than Miranda, who apparently only knows how to spell her name. That's all Miranda's got at this point. Poor Miranda. This is a ranking system. In very competitive colleges, sometimes you will hear about students sabotaging each other. That is because everything is based on a ranking system. You don't have to be as good as Alice. You don't have to be very good as long as everyone else does worse. So, if you somehow sabotage Bob through Miranda by stealing the only textbook from the library, you know that you are going to beat them, so you're going to get the A. You don't actually need to study. You just need to crash everyone else. That's what a true curve is. Sometimes the particularly cruel teachers use the normal curve. The normal curve is very special. This one, you not only have to be better than everyone else, but you have to be a lot better than everyone else. So they take the average and they find something called the standard deviation. The standard deviation is a process that you go through. It's actually shown on your calculator when you do one variable statistics. What it does, the standard deviation tells us how far the numbers are spread out. So we start at the mean, the 45.6. That should be in the middle. Then what they do is they take the standard deviation and they add a standard deviation above and then another one above. And then they add a standard deviation below and another one below. The middle of the graph is then who gets the C's. A's and B's go at the top of the curve, and D's and F's go at the bottom of the curve. In this case, your average is 45.6. You have to do better than 45.6, but not just better than 45.6. You have to do a lot better than 45.6. In order to get an A, you need to be 2 standard deviations above the average. In this case, not even Alice gets an A. Alice actually knows what she's doing, but not even Alice gets an A because she isn't far enough away from the average to get an A. She does get a B, thankfully. So even though she gets that 90, she's got a B because she's not far enough away from the average. Then we've got a whole bunch of C's. Everyone tries to fall in the C range. That's what the normal curve is designed to do. The majority of people will get into that middle curve, the middle of the curve. Notice, even Miranda, who can barely spell her name, doesn't get an F. She gets a D. In order to get an F, you would somehow have to get a negative grade, which is impossible. In this class, it's almost impossible to get an A. It is definitely impossible to get an F because no one can be that far away from the average to get an F. So that's how the normal curve works. So your beautiful grade of an A actually a C in this grading system. However, you're still stuck at that 64. You really should have done your homework. Anyway, moving on, there are things called percentiles. Now, you got 64%, that is your average for this class. You have failed, technically. Percentile. A lot of you have heard about percentiles from maybe the SAT or the PSAT. The percentile is how many people got your score or lower. So once again, it's all about comparing your score to other people. It doesn't matter how well you did. It doesn't matter how many answers you got correct. It's how many answers other people got correct. So in this case, getting your score or below, that would be you all the way to poor sweet Miranda. So your percentile would be 13 out of 14 or 92.9%. So you're in the 93rd percentile, even though you got a 64%. That is what percentiles mean. So be very careful when you're looking at the SAT, when you're looking at your PSAT. It is not the percent of questions you got correct. Percentiles do not mean percent. Percentile means how many people got your score or below your score. So if other people learned different things or studied more, your percentile goes down. If you sabotage a whole bunch of people, then your score goes up and your percentile goes up. That has nothing to do with your SAT or PSAT actual score. Your score is different. Your percentile is just how many people you beat. Now that we understand how grades are calculated and what can happen after grades, I want to talk more about our beautiful population. In our population, we've got that sample space, and normally we write out the sample space, but there's easier ways to do that if you've got a nice two-way table. Sometimes, instead of writing everything out or looking at probabilities, we summarize the population with parameters. We try and find one average number that will summarize our entire population, give us a gist of what's happening. Those parameters can then be altered by weights, scales, and curves, as we have seen in this episode. In our next episode, what we are going to do is we are going to take that population. We are going to take chunks of that population and to make a sample. And I want to talk more about how we take that and make a sample, because it makes a great deal of sense if we just have a stack of cards. If you've got a deck of cards, you shuffle them up and you can draw one card. That's part of your sample. Draw 10 cards, that's a sample. However, what happens if you want to talk about a bigger population, like the population of America? How do we get a sample of that population? Stay tuned for next time. The end.